Have things gotten bad enough? Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson from Nomad Capitalist, and in this video, I'm going to talk about something that I hear from people in my life, friends, family, people on the street, when it comes to the things that we talk about here on this channel. You know, ever since I've been a kid, I've been fascinated with the idea of traveling and living overseas. When I was young, in my early 20s, I started traveling in what became non-stop perpetual travel, or now an entire global citizen, what we call nomad capitalist lifestyle. And what I found almost immediately when I started going to other places was how other countries had things that were better than where I was from in the United States. It could have been a higher interest rate. It could have been the banks were safer, a few of them were failing. It could have been more attractive real estate returns. Could have been more personal freedoms. Could have been better social conditions, i.e. I felt more comfortable talking to people there, making friends, starting relationships. And what I learned was there's no one place that has a monopoly on being number one. There is no best place in the world other than in your heart and in your mind. And so what I've heard from folks when I've, throughout my entire life, talked about the idea to diversify internationally is, well, that makes a lot of sense. And when things get bad enough, I will go and do that. You know, we talked about you can't buy fire insurance after your house burns down. You can't buy car insurance after your car crashes. You know, you have to have the insurance ahead of time. And I want to challenge you in this because if we understand that the best country in the world, interestingly, for most people, the best country in the world is the one that they're from. It's amazing how we're all from the best country in the world. And I understand that in our hearts, we want to feel special. We want to feel a certain allegiance to where we're from. It is our nature as a tribal species. But in our minds, I want us to understand that no one place is number one in everything, let alone probably anything. And if you are waiting to apply the strategies that we talk about, you know, legally reducing your taxes so that you have more money to save and to reinvest in your business and grow and create wealth and to protect yourself, having a second residence and a second passport so you always have a safe place to go when times get tough, whether that's a quarantine situation, whether that's political, whether it's financial, your country raises their taxes, as is happening in South Africa right now, or whether it's something really bad is happening where you're from and your family need to get out. You know, having other investments, having assets like bank accounts, real estate, precious metals overseas that cannot be taken. These are all things that, to me, are sane diversification strategies. You probably wouldn't put all your money in one stock. And we've seen over just the course of just in this century, people who had all their money in one company stock they worked for Enron, now they're bankrupt and they can't even retire. You wouldn't do that if you were smart. You'd have diversified assets in different asset classes. Perhaps you'd have some different currencies. You'd have some gold, you'd have some cryptocurrencies, you'd have some real estate. What we talk about here at Nomad Capitalist is just taking sane diversification that a lot of people preach in one country and changing the nature of it just being in one country. You know, having real estate in another country probably is not going to hurt you. It may help you in that the real estate may go up, you may earn a higher yield, maybe you get a second residence, maybe you get a second passport from it. Listen, maybe the property goes down a bit in value. Maybe the currency in another country drops against your currency and your asset goes down, but you still have the asset. So most people, I would say, aren't going to be hurt by diversifying and owning a home somewhere else or moving some of your gold somewhere else. It all comes back to what's in your mind. If you believe that you're from the United States, for example, and you believe that the banks there would never take your money, they're never going to bail in your money because the banks need help, the government doesn't want to provide it. They're never going to do anything to freeze your account. There's never going to be a civil forfeiture. All the stories in the news, those don't apply. If you imagine that everything there is perfect, but that the minute you move your money to Singapore, suddenly all those things are going to happen to you. The government's going to be out to get you. The banks are going to collapse. No one's going to step in to help. That does not make sense. Okay? That's a function of our tribalism, to me, where we will defend where we are because we know it. What I've learned over these last 13 years of traveling all over the world is in many ways, pretty similar. Countries have different cultures. Some governments are better than others. Some places are better than others for certain things. Yeah, you're not going to go and put all your money in a bank in Myanmar or in Tanzania or in Bolivia. That wouldn't make sense either. But taking part of your money and putting it in a stable bank, which could be in an emerging market, or depending on how much money you have, it could be a highly sophisticated market. It could be a Singapore, Switzerland, the UK, something like that. But that diversification is not going to kill you, because all the things that you think will never happen in your country, many people think will happen almost immediately in another country. And yet what we've seen is, over the last decade alone, you realize the great extent to which you're being spied upon if you live in the West, how the government's listening to phone calls and reading emails and has access to everything you do. You've been quarantined in your homes. Governments have put policies in place to take your money. In some countries, they've bailed in the banks and people have lost money. Some of them, a lot of their money. When banks no longer worked, they became creditors of the bank. Other countries are preparing for that to happen and putting the laws in place so that they can do that when they need to, shifting the responsibility from the government, who claims they're there to support the financial system, onto you, the little guy. There are countries that have taken private pension plans and others that have the opportunity to. And we could go on and on and on. These are the things that, in my mind, you want to protect yourself from. Now, I'm not a doomsdayer. I'm not a guy who is stockpiling 5 years of dried foods in my garage. I am not a perma-bear. I am an optimist, and I think everything's going to be all right. But to say everything's going to be all right, and just to dig your head in the sand like an ostrich and say, well, I don't have to do anything and it'll be okay. The same reason you're successful in business, the same reason you have successful investments, the same reason you created wealth was because you paid attention and you minimized risks and you took advantage when there were opportunities. To just say everything's going to be okay and I'm going to sit back in my country, which feels familiar to me, unlike those other countries I haven't been to that don't feel familiar, where I don't know and I'm scared. The antidote is not just continuing to say, well, I'm going to ignore all the warning signs and just imagine things are going to be okay. Because Andrew Henderson said things are going to be okay. Things are going to be okay. But just because things are going to be okay and when there's an economic recession, it'll eventually come back, But that doesn't mean that some businesses won't collapse during the recession. Doesn't mean some folks won't lose their jobs. Doesn't mean that you won't lose some money on some deals. And if you cash out, then you'll have lost. Saying that things are going to be okay does not mean that you don't need to take proper precautions. Now, in my life personally, I've not only taken precautions, but I live the precautions. I have left the country where I'm from. I have moved away from that place. I have diversified into other places that are not just my safe havens. They're where I live, where I play, where I work, where I hire, where I have friends. And so you can choose to do that too. But the question again is, have things gotten bad enough yet? What's interesting is I started following politics in the United States in 1996. More so in 2000, but I started somewhat in 1996. Now, I recently talked about how I've largely stopped following politics. I read the news that's relevant to what we talk about, but I don't get involved in all the nonsense. But since 1996, you know what's interesting? I remember watching MSNBC back in 1996, and then later, would watch Fox News and all the other news networks. Every election, every presidential election since 1996 was the most important election of your lifetime. 1996, if we let Bill Clinton, we're going down a dark path. 2000, hey, it's left versus right. 2004, are we going to stand with patriotism? Or, every year, 2008, are we going to elect a communist? In 2012, are we going to re-elect the communist? 2016, every single election is the most important election of your lifetime. This draws a very close parallel to people who, in my mind, people who say, when things get bad enough. The same people who are saying when things get bad enough, as bad things are literally happening, as the government takes more of your freedoms, as they impose more regulations, as they raise taxes, as they make it more difficult to leave, as they make it in the United States to where if you owe child support, if you owe taxes, if you owe a lot of different things to the government, which can happen innocuously, by the way, if you owe anything, you can't get a passport, you can't leave. They're making it difficult in many other countries to leave for tax purposes. It's much more difficult than it used to be. It's possible, but more difficult. All these different things are happening where they're saying, we're going to make it tougher for you to leave. They're imposing more and more regulations to scare people away from their legal options of things like offshore banking. Now, these are all things that we handle for folks every day, but if you are just looking at this from the outside, you're saying this offshore stuff is confusing because all these different bad things are happening. And so, have things gotten bad enough? If you're going to take the approach, much like the people in politics, much like the political watchers, who every year say, well, this is the one, this is the one, this is the one, and you let, every bad thing go by. Okay, well, poo that. The next time something bad happens, I see this all the time. Then the next bad thing happens, I talk to folks from the United States, and I say, well, hey, but what about this? What about that? Things that 20 years ago they never would have even imagined happening, right? And they say, well, yeah, but and then they explain it away. And then they'll call you, the same person will call you, and they'll say, did you see what happened like in such and such a country? Like, one guy was rioting in the streets. It's like, yeah, we actually bought some property at a discount and it's already bounced back. I had a mentor once who was teaching me how to run a business. He says, Andrew, you don't appreciate the money that you bring in enough, right? In sales, revenue, you don't appreciate that enough. But yet you put this incredibly much higher weight on money that you pay out. So if you earn $1, you're like, who cares? If you spend $1, you're more concerned about that. I had to change my entire mindset at one point in business because, I could bring in, so much revenue, but paying out even a fraction of it was very uncomfortable because I weighted things differently. And I think in the same way, a lot of people, because again, they know their country, they know, they feel comfortable. They feel they have some kind of control, as if you live in the United States or any other big Western country, you somehow have the control to tell your government or to control where your government's going to go or what direction they're gonna go in, or your one vote is going to change anything. But people underestimate what's happening in their own country and they overestimate what's happening in other countries. Okay. Now there's two approaches here. You can simply say, it makes sense to diversify internationally, even if nothing happens. And, again, I'm not here trying to focus on all the bad things happening. I want to focus on all the good things that are happening. And you know what? This is why I stopped following the politics, because I got away from the things that I didn't like, so I no longer have to worry about them. But if you're just getting started, it makes sense to be diversified internationally. It makes sense that no one country controls you, because we've seen throughout history what happens when one country controls people. How many people throughout history would have liked to have a second passport and an escape route? How many people? And how many of those people who ended up wanting an escape route at one point said, well, hey, you know what? It's not that bad yet. By the time it gets really bad, you're not going to have the freedom. You're not going to have the options. You're not going to be able to do anything. So you can take the approach that it just makes sense to be ready, or you can take the other approach with the same outcome, which is to say, well, hold on, let's look at all these different things that are happening, and you'll realize the cost of getting a second citizenship has gone up. It's harder to get one than it used to be, 20 years ago. Opening an offshore bank account's a lot harder. Minimum investments in a lot of countries are a lot higher. It's still very doable. We're helping folks with this all the time. The issue is just making sense of all of this. Have things gotten bad enough yet? If you don't believe they're getting bad enough, you can err on the side of sane diversification, just being spread out, making sure that no one owns you. It's a good feeling. I can tell you when you do it, you just feel differently inside. Or you can take the approach of saying, let me actually go through and look at these things that I've been writing off, at these things that I've been ignoring, at the bad news that I've been ignoring. Maybe that means you want to go out and travel and see other countries and realize that people in those other countries aren't losing all their money in the banks. Their real estate's not worth nothing. The government's not taking their assets. Their passport works the same way yours does. Maybe that's the approach. But have things gotten bad enough? What are you going to do about it? That is the question I want to ask you today. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.